Hey everyone, this is Oscar from Underdog, and let's talk about hard industrial techno. Today I want to do a study of one of the masters of hard industrial techno, SNTS. I guess some people call him saints. I don't really know what to call him. All I know is that the music is relentless, unforgiving, uncompromising, really intentionally broken, really stylistically clear, and I love it. So specifically, this producer, Saints, right, has done a bunch of hard, relentless industrial stuff, but also some more introspective cinematic stuff. We're going to be talking about the hard, relentless stuff, and specifically just about the drums. I want to do a series on this where we analyze each aspect of these tracks, and today we're just going to do a 1-bar loop of just the drums. Let's get into it. Before we go any further, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and consider signing up for one of our classes at underdog.brussels. Come say hi on the Discord channel, or leave a comment below telling us what you think. Now let's get into Ableton. Okay, in general, let's simplify this thing to 3 main elements. There is the kick group, there is the foley group, and there is the hi-hats group. One of the aspects of this music is that all the elements feel very glued together. They all feel like they're part of one pulsating mass, and that suggests that we need to do quite a lot of group processing. Now, actually, the group processing that we're going to do is not on the master. Like on the master, what you're going to see is all we've got is like a smiley curve EQ and a limiter. So that's not where we're going to be doing the glue processing. What we're going to be doing is mostly on this drum group. Now, listen to just the drums. Compared to the full group, right? So this is just the kick drum plus the rumble. Now, because we know that we're going to want several layers of grit, I already immediately decided that I wanted to run all of this stuff through Soundtoys Decapitator, because for me, the SNTS very much sounds like the Decapitator. So I knew that on the group, I was already going to put a decapitator very early on in the sound design process and then scoped all my sounds into that. Okay, so the decapitator is on punish mode, which gives this really characteristic overdriven sound. And see what happens when I turn it off. That's just night and day, right? So given that this is an intrinsic part of the sound, I put it on very early into the process and then designed my drums into that. And so the kick in itself is already quite a punchy kick. It's from the Setalk Mass sample pack, which I recommend you check out on his Bandcamp. He sells it, and all those kicks are, as they say. And then we just set up a rumble. And I want to do a whole video on rumbles in general, but I'll just sketch it out for you here. What you have is you have a kick which is dry, and then you have 1 or 2 tracks which take the output of that kick channel as their input, and they apply a whole bunch of effects with 100% wet on them so that you create sort of echoes of that kick, but with heavy effects on them, and those are going to form your rumble. And you're going to have 2 tracks, one of which is the low-end rumble and one of which is the mid or high-end rumble. So let's have a look at the low-end rumble. The low-end rumble, what it has is, it has a delay on it, 100% wet, so it's going to create that kind of staggered pattern. It's got a reverb on it that's relatively wet. It goes into a utility which makes it mono. It has an auto filter which removes all the high end. Then it has an LFO tool, which is just a sidechain pump, like that. It pumps on the upbeat. And then I also scoop out some of the low mids because it was kind of blurring the definition of the kick in that area. So I wanted to give those frequencies back to the original kick. In itself, it sounds like this. So you go from this with this. It becomes like just one big mass, right? And remember, all of this is being processed through the decapitator as well. So if you turn off the decapitator, all of this is going to sound pretty lame, actually. So it's interesting that way. And then we do the same again on the highs for the rumble, which has a delay on it, a reverb on it. It's actually the exact same as the low-end rumble, except there's also a saturator on there, and it's a band pass filter instead of a low pass filter. And so this gives me some extra focus on those upper harmonics of the crunch. That just makes everything sound a bit more fresh and not just subby. And again, we cut out the frequencies in the low mids just to clear up a little bit for the kick. And that one sounds like this. There we go. Now, on the bus, there's a couple of things. Obviously, the decapitator that I was talking about, but let me turn everything off and show you what this sounds like without any of the group processing. Okay, first of all, it's really quiet, right? I mean, a lot of this extra saturation and stuff is adding volume, which is, of course, subjectively going to make it sound better. But let's have a look. So one of the things that was important was to low pass everything here, because the kick was very high definition, had a lot of transient to it, and actually I want everything to sound a bit more low definition and less hi-fi, you know what I mean? Like a little bit more broken, intentionally broken. That's one of the guiding themes of this whole composition. So without it, and the goal here in the end is that we're going to add saturation to it. So in the end, it's not going to sound so dark and underwater. It's going to get those harmonics back through distortion. Now, drum bus as well is a classic for this. And I do quite a bit of stuff here. I put it on medium distortion, crank up the drive, put on the compressor, put on the crunch, turn off the damp, basically, and then increase the transients a little bit. Don't put on the boom, though. This adds just a little bit of mid-range punch that I think it deserves. It definitely toughens it up a little bit. Then the decapitator, obviously. I feel like I'm about to encourage a lot of people to buy decapitator thanks to this. My God, what a difference of effect, right? Okay, and then I've got an equalizer on there, which all it does is rolls off the ultra lows and boosts a little bit around the fundamental frequency of the kick, which it just gives back a little bit of body to the kick. And one thing that's really interesting is that on the kick, there was actually kind of this honky sub-frequency on there that if that sub-frequency went through all the distortion, it created this kind of like kind of sound through it. And that was kind of annoying. And so what I did is I notched it out on the fundamental frequency of the kick itself, which is something I usually would never recommend to do, you know, but I took it out here. Then the entire kick gets saturated through the saturation plugin, and then whatever low end that maybe I was missing, I just boosted back like this. So in the end, there's still a bit of a sharp, like a defined low end, and we remove that honky frequency that it had. Let me see if I can show you the honky frequency. So when I had that going, it was just kind of making everything less punchy and making it more tonal because of that fundamental frequency going playing a sub bass note that's quite long, and when it goes through the saturator, it creates like a sine wave, like a in the mid range, which is just not the kind of violent punch that we're looking for. So where was I? On the drum group, we've got that. And then what else do I have? Oh yeah, this is really subtle. It looks maybe complicated, but this is a trick I got from Julian Earl, which check out his channel because his techno tutorials are freaking awesome. And so what he does often is he does an effect track where he has one of his chains, which is a dry chain like this. And then the other one is an amplifier, which he then uses an EQ3 on to just take a couple of the frequencies. Like it's basically kind of like a band pass filter or where you just roll off the highs and the lows. So I'm only keeping the sort of brighter frequencies that this amp is generating, just to create a little bit of subtle high end, because, you know, I did feel like with this rolling off that I had removed quite a lot of lows. So let's show it without. There we go, a bit of crunch in the high end. If you solo it, it's just that, you know, like this, that tells our ears, like in a sense, subjectively, that this sound is loud, like a subjectively loud, like a fake loud. You know, we add this layers of distortion, and this distortion usually only happens when a sound is really loud. So our ears immediately say, "Oh, this must be loud," even though in terms of volume, it's not that loud. Notice, by the way, with all this saturation, saturation tends to often remove some of the dynamics of your sound. So the difference between loud and quiet, right? So if you have a drum group and you look on your session view, you'll often see that on your drum bus, the volume, the difference between the peak and the RMS is quite high, and it jumps all over the place. Now in this case, with all this saturation, it's almost not going to move. It's going to be pinned. Look at the volume levels. So that is a super compressed signal, right? This is hyper compressed. And some of the people in the audience like are going to be mildly offended by that and say, whoa, 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 this is compressed down to nothing. But if you look at a SNTS track here, which I'm not going to play because of the copyright restrictions, but you'll see the volume meters also being pinned. Look at that. Look at where that is. That is zero dynamic range. It's just pinned all the time. And so this is also sort of where we are. We're just almost not moving. In a lot of genres and other productions that I do, you'll see these volume meters jump all over the place. But in this case, super compressed, super limited. And it's mostly thanks to this saturation, because I'm not doing that much compression on this bus. There's a little bit of a compressor going into the drum bus. But then on the master, I do a little bit of limiting here. But this is just a placeholder for at the end of the track, when this is going to get mastered, there's going to be a more potent limiter on there probably. So we'll see. This is just something that's not doing too much work at the moment. Okay, so there's this drum loop, which is great, and this is the thing that's gonna really drive the dance floor, you know. But there's still a few things missing. So some of the things that Saints also does is he adds in a lot of like foley sounds, or atmospheric sounds, or cinematic sounds, or texture sounds, or whatever the hell you want to call them. But they're not necessarily from the drum group. They are kind of like something that you would download at freesound.org. So check out that website. They have a lot of like metallic sounds, banging sounds, industrial sounds. So all you got to do is go there, make an account, download a whole bunch of their free sounds, put them all in a big folder and call them like metallic techno sounds, or whatever the heck you want to call them. And then I create something that I call here a grit instrument. And all it is just a drum rack. Let me show you. It's a drum rack where I just put these sounds in a sampler. And so I had this Sounds of a Factory sample. And so it's a very long sample. It's 4 minutes of audio, but I just drag it around until I drag the sample start around until I find a moment that kind of pulsates well. And let me show you what this grit instrument is doing. So there's just two sounds there. There's just two different types of Foley sounds that are playing kind of a rhythmical pattern. One of them is like this, and the other one's like this. And so they go bam, boom, 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 bam, boom, boom, boom. And what we want is that this complements, like that this accentuates the groove of the drums, because in this other video that I did recently about syncopation, you'll see where you have a straight drum groove and then you start emphasizing the weak beats compared to that straight drum groove. In this case, we don't want to do that. We don't really want to emphasize the weak beats. We want to emphasize the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want to make it like nuanced in between. We just want it to be straightforward, driving, and hard. And so this thing is also counting the same kind of a beat. It's going 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's pretty cool. And then there is another one, which is just the same concept again. It's just an industrial sound thing that goes, oh, it goes like this. Sounds pretty cool, huh? So again, just a found sounds that I put into a sampler, and I did pretty much nothing with it. Oh, I did some filter manipulation where it's sort of driven through an overdriven filter. Like Ableton has these overdrive modes over here that are kind of fun to experiment with. But then it goes through some saturation, some limiting, a little bit of reverb, and I just carve out the frequencies that I wanted at the high and the high end there. And I wanted this to be kind of like I call this a lead foley just because it's like almost like a lead synthesizer in the sense that this song is going to be very sparse. And so complementing the big drum groove that's going on, there have to be like 1 or 2 sounds that kind of speak more clearly. And so I considered this one to be kind of fresh out of the box, like a very open sound. And so together it goes like this. Because of the sound, the way the sounds are programmed, I feel like you could, if you didn't know any better, you could believe that this is part of the drum groove. So the whole thing feels like one big unit hitting you in the face. And then when you have so many low definition elements, one of the ways to make it clear that this is intentional is to add some high definition elements. And really the hi-hats kind of do that here. So the hi-hats are very simple. There's 2 layers of hi-hats. These are very fresh sounds. So by the way of these being so fresh and clear and high, you make it clear that all the rest is intentionally dark and broken. And so the hi-hats, you could break it down into just the rolling hi-hats, which is every 16th note. It's just a 909 hi-hat going through a little bit of bit crushing and then some pumping, some sidechain pumping. And the bit crushing is doing quite a bit. Like Decimort automatically makes things just sound beautiful. If there's one plugin that I really recommend getting, it's Decimort. It was so freaking cheap and I put it on everything. Whenever I want something to sound less hi-fi, all I do is I go into Decimort, bring down the frequency on the sampler, maybe turn on the filter if I want it to sound a bit darker, turn on this filter if I want it to sound even darker, and turn up the jitter if I want it to sound more noisy, or turn up the preamplifier if I want to make it sound even more distressed. Then you got to bring down the output volume though as well. Like in general, this thing is just a beautiful palette of distortion. It's one of my favorite plugins recently. I shouldn't even tell you about it because I want it to be my secret, but too late, I just did, so you're welcome. And then you've got this rolling 16th hi-hat, and then you complement it with what I call an up-hat. I mean, that word doesn't exist. It's actually a hi-hat which plays on the upbeat, but I always just type in up-hat because there's a very specific moment in a general techno groove which goes boom tss, boom tss, boom tss. You know that it marks the upbeat, and so that's all that this one does. So it's like very similar. It's also a 909 hi-hat, which is has a very short decay on it, so it accentuates the transient quite strongly, but also take away some of the ultra high definition frequencies up at the top and just saturate it a little bit, like nothing too drastic. Then on the group, I did decide that I wanted to put a tiny little bit of Camelcrusher on there, but it's not doing much. Look at the distortion here. It's just got a little bit of that mech on it, and it's only 50% wet, so it's just adding a little bit of sizzle at the top end. And then I did also roll off the lows and boost the high end a tiny bit because I want this thing to be relatively hi-fi compared to the lo-fi-ness of the drums, because that contrast is going to give the satisfying and professional feeling of this. So let's listen to everything again. So without the hi-hats to anchor it, it does feel a bit fuzzy and dark, and those hi-hats kind of bring everything into focus. Okay, and that was our first study about the drums of Saints. In the next few videos, we'll be exploring the additional elements that we need to create a nice musical story and how to proceed onto the arrangement and finalizing this track. Like I said, like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Stay producing, be good to one another, and take care. Bye bye.